If kindness has a weight, today it will be heavier than fear. Thick gray smoke rolled across the canyon long before Clara Brooks smelled the fire. The sharp scent of burning pine drifted through the mountain air while frightened birds burst from the treetops in restless waves. She stopped walking, tightening her grip on the small basket hanging from her arm. Only an hour earlier, the narrow forest trail had been peaceful, filled with wildflowers and the gentle sound of the river flowing hundreds of feet below the cliffs. Now the wind carried glowing ash across the sky like tiny orange stars falling in daylight. Clara hurried forward, her sturdy leather boots striking the rocky path as she searched for the source of the smoke. Most people from the nearby mountain village had already returned home after hearing warnings about the spreading wildfire. Clara had stayed behind to gather medicine herbs for an elderly neighbor who depended on them every week. She had promised herself she would be quick. She had promised she would not take unnecessary risks. Then she heard it. A deep, strained whine echoed through the smoke. It was quiet, almost swallowed by the crackling trees, yet impossible to ignore. Clara immediately changed direction, following the sound toward the old rope bridge that stretched across the canyon. The bridge had connected both sides of the valley for generations. Weathered wooden planks swayed above the rushing river nearly 100 feet below, held together by thick ropes that had survived countless storms. Everyone in the village respected the bridge. Everyone also knew it should never be crossed during a fire. Sparks drifted through the air as Clara reached the cliff's edge. Her heart nearly stopped. A giant black wolf lay near the middle of the bridge. It was unlike any wolf she had ever imagined. Its broad shoulders were almost as tall as her waist. Its thick, dark fur reflected faint traces of silver beneath the smoke, and one enormous paw was caught between broken wooden boards. The wolf lifted its head slowly. Brilliant silver eyes met hers across the swaying bridge. Clara expected anger or fear. Instead, she saw exhaustion. The bridge creaked loudly beneath another shower of burning embers. She looked behind her. The safest choice was obvious. She could run back to the village and bring help. But one glance toward the wolf told her there was not enough time. Another support rope had already begun to smolder. Clara quietly placed her basket on the ground. "Please stay with me," she whispered, not even realizing whether she was speaking to herself or the wolf. Taking a slow breath, she stepped onto the bridge. Every plank groaned beneath her weight. The hot wind pushed against her shoulders while smoke blurred the opposite side of the canyon. She kept moving one careful step at a time, refusing to look down at the roaring river below. The giant wolf watched her approach without moving. As she reached it, she knelt beside the trapped paw. "You are much bigger than I expected," she said with a nervous smile. "I hope you are patient, because I have never rescued anyone your size before." The wolf remained perfectly still, almost as though it understood every word. Clara carefully lifted the broken board enough to free its paw. The wolf slowly pulled itself loose but stumbled almost immediately, unable to place full weight on its leg. "You cannot walk," she murmured. She looked toward the far side of the canyon. Then she looked back at the smoke rapidly spreading behind them. Another loud snap echoed through the bridge as one of the thick ropes tightened under growing strain. Clara closed her eyes for one brief moment before making the only choice her heart would allow. She slipped one arm beneath the wolf's neck and the other beneath its chest, struggling to lift even part of its tremendous weight. "I know this sounds impossible," she whispered with a determined smile, "but we are getting across together." To her surprise, the wolf shifted carefully, allowing more of its weight to rest against her shoulders instead of resisting. Step by step, they began moving across the trembling bridge. Clara's breathing grew heavier with every foot they crossed. Sweat mixed with drifting ash while the hot wind tugged at her clothes. She never noticed the strange silver crest hidden beneath the thick fur around the wolf's neck. She never noticed several distant riders emerging through the smoke on the opposite ridge, searching desperately for someone they believed could not possibly still be alive. She noticed only the quiet trust in the wolf's silver eyes and the growing sound behind her as one massive rope stretched to its limit with a long, terrifying crack. The bridge swayed beneath every careful step, its weathered planks groaning as though they were pleading for relief. Clara Brooks tightened her grip around the giant wolf's broad shoulders, breathing harder with every yard they crossed. The creature was far heavier than she had imagined, yet somehow it leaned against her with remarkable care, shifting just enough to help rather than hinder. "Thank you," she whispered between breaths. "I know you are trying." The wolf lifted its silver eyes toward her for a brief moment before lowering its head again, as though embarrassed that it could not walk on its own. Hot wind swept across the canyon, carrying swirling ash that stung Clara's cheeks and blurred the narrow path ahead. She blinked away the smoke and forced herself to focus on the next plank instead of the rushing river nearly 100 feet below. Looking down would only make her legs shake. Looking back would only remind her how little time remained. Another loud creak echoed through the bridge. One of the thick support ropes twisted under growing strain, sending a ripple through the entire crossing. Clara froze for only a heartbeat before taking another determined step. "Do not give up now," she murmured softly. "We are closer than before." The wolf answered with a quiet, rumbling breath that sounded almost like encouragement. Despite its enormous size, it never struggled against her. It trusted her completely. That realization somehow gave Clara more strength than she thought she possessed. She adjusted her footing and continued forward one slow step after another. Every few feet, she paused to steady both herself and the wolf before moving again. Her shoulders ached. Her arms trembled. Even so, she refused to stop. The smoke thickened until the opposite side of the canyon nearly disappeared behind a gray curtain. Clara could barely see the far end of the bridge anymore. "Wonderful," she sighed with a tired smile. "Now I cannot even tell where I am going." She laughed quietly at herself despite everything. "I suppose we will simply keep moving until solid ground decides to find us." The wolf turned its head toward her, and for the first time she thought she saw the faintest hint of amusement inside those remarkable silver eyes. "There it is again," she said. "You keep looking at me as though you understand every word." A sudden gust pushed against them, making the bridge sway from side to side. Clara instinctively wrapped both arms more securely around the wolf. The giant creature responded by carefully shifting its weight lower, making it just a little easier for her to continue. "You really are trying to help," she whispered with grateful surprise. The thought warmed her heart more than the fire ever could. Somewhere beyond the smoke, distant voices called to one another. Clara could not understand the words, only the urgency behind them. She glanced toward the sound, but saw nothing except drifting ash and towering pines. On the far ridge, Captain Nathan Holloway urged his horse forward before stopping abruptly at the edge of the canyon. Beside him, several royal guards stared in disbelief through the smoke. "There," one of them breathed. "Someone is on the bridge." Nathan narrowed his eyes until he could finally make out the faint silhouettes. A young woman. A giant wolf. His expression changed instantly. "It cannot be." None of the guards moved. They knew the bridge was too unstable to support additional weight. They could only watch and pray the crossing would hold a little longer. Halfway across, another sharp crack rang through the canyon. Clara felt the entire bridge dip beneath her boots. She swallowed hard, but did not stop. "Almost there," she whispered to the wolf, though she was no longer certain whether she was encouraging the animal or herself. One more careful step. Then another. The far cliff slowly emerged through the smoke like a promise waiting beyond the fire. Solid ground was finally within reach. Clara smiled through her exhaustion. "See," she said softly. "I told you we could do impossible things one step at a time." The wolf slowly lifted its head and looked directly into her eyes. There was something extraordinary in that gaze now. Gratitude, respect, and a quiet sorrow that felt far older than either of them. Before Clara could wonder what it meant, another deep snap thundered across the canyon. One of the main ropes finally gave way, whipping through the smoky air as the entire bridge lurched violently beneath their feet, leaving only a few desperate steps between them and safety. The moment the great rope snapped, the bridge lurched sharply beneath Clara Brooks, throwing her off balance. She instinctively tightened both arms around the giant wolf as the weathered planks shifted beneath her boots. For one terrifying heartbeat, everything seemed suspended between sky and river. Then the bridge settled just enough for her to plant one foot in front of the other again. She did not look back. She could not. Every breath carried the bitter scent of smoke while glowing embers drifted through the air like restless fireflies. "Just a little farther," she whispered, though her voice was almost lost beneath the groaning ropes. "We have come too far to stop now." The wolf lifted its head weakly, its brilliant silver eyes never leaving her face. Somehow that quiet gaze gave Clara enough courage to take another step. Then another. Her shoulders burned with exhaustion. Every muscle begged her to rest, yet she refused to surrender. She had made a promise the moment she stepped onto the bridge. No one who trusted her would be left behind. Ahead, the rocky cliff finally emerged through the smoke. Only a few more yards separated them from solid ground. Clara forced her aching legs to move faster. The bridge swayed violently again, but she kept going. Almost there, she breathed with a hopeful smile. I knew you could do this. As though understanding every word, the wolf carefully shifted more of its own weight onto its front legs, making her burden just a little lighter. It was only a small movement, yet Clara felt the difference immediately. Thank you, she whispered. You are helping more than you know. On the opposite side of the canyon, Captain Nathan Holloway and the Royal Guards stood frozen in anxious silence. None of them dared step onto the failing bridge. Their horses stamped nervously against the rocky ground while smoke curled around the towering pines. One young guard swallowed hard. She is going to make it. Nathan never took his eyes off the two distant figures. Keep the path clear, he ordered quietly. The moment they reach this side, everyone stays back. The guards exchanged puzzled glances, but obeyed without question. They had never seen their captain speak with such careful respect about a complete stranger. Clara finally felt solid earth beneath one trembling boot. Relief rushed through her so suddenly that tears blurred her vision. She guided the giant wolf the final few steps until both of them reached the rocky cliff. The instant they crossed on a stable ground, Clara gently lowered the enormous creature onto a patch of soft grass. She dropped to her knees beside it, breathing so hard she could barely speak. We did it, she laughed between exhausted breaths. I told you we would. The wolf slowly turned its head toward her. Instead of trying to stand, it stretched one massive paw forward until it rested lightly against her hand. Clara smiled through smoke-stained tears and carefully wrapped both hands around the thick black paw. You are safe now. At that exact moment, a deafening crack echoed across the canyon. Clara instinctively looked over her shoulder. The remaining support ropes finally gave way. One by one, the weathered planks disappeared into the smoky valley below until nothing remained except drifting ash and empty space where the bridge had stood for generations. A stunned silence settled over everyone watching. Clara stared in disbelief. Only seconds separated survival from disaster. Had they hesitated for even a moment longer, neither she nor the wolf would have reached the far side in time. She slowly looked back toward her unusual companion. That was close, she whispered with a shaky smile. The wolf answered by gently lowering its great head into her lap. Clara instinctively stroked the thick fur behind one ear, surprised by how soft it felt beneath the layer of soot. You must be exhausted, she murmured. So am I. The giant creature closed its silver eyes, remaining perfectly still beside her, as though the simple touch brought comfort after a very long journey. Captain Nathan finally approached, stopping several yards away. His expression held both relief and quiet disbelief. Before speaking, his eyes fell upon something Clara had never noticed. Beneath the soot-darkened fur, partly hidden near the wolf's neck, a polished silver collar reflected the afternoon sunlight. Engraved upon its surface was the unmistakable crest of the royal pack. Nathan drew a slow breath, lowered his head respectfully toward the resting wolf, and whispered so softly that only the nearest guards could hear. We found His Majesty. Captain Nathan Holloway remained where he stood, his head still respectfully lowered toward the giant black wolf. None of the royal guard spoke. The only sounds came from the distant crackling forest and the steady rush of the river far below the ruined canyon. Clara Brooks slowly looked from the polished silver collar to the solemn faces surrounding her. Confusion filled her tired eyes. Why are all of you bowing to a wolf? She asked quietly. Nathan lifted his gaze, but chose his words with great care. Because he is far more than he appears to be. Clara frowned gently. I do not understand. Before the captain could answer, the giant wolf slowly pushed itself upright. Its injured legs still trembled, but instead of retreating behind the soldiers, it stepped closer to Clara until its broad shoulder rested lightly beside hers. The movement surprised every guard. Nathan had served the royal family for many years, and had never seen the great wolf willingly seek comfort from anyone. Clara instinctively rested one hand against the soft black fur. "Easy," she whispered. "You do not have to stand if you are still tired." The wolf turned its silver eyes toward her, calm and trusting. Nathan released a quiet breath. "His Majesty has accepted your kindness." Clara blinked. "His Majesty?" The captain nodded once. "The silver collar belongs only to the Alpha King." Clara immediately looked back at the wolf and then shook her head with an uncertain smile. "That cannot be right. He is just him." One of the younger guards smiled despite himself. Nathan did not argue. "Perhaps that is exactly why he chose to stay beside you." Clara looked down at the enormous creature sitting peacefully beside her. If he truly is someone important, then he must be exhausted. Titles can wait until after he rests. The captain could not hide his admiration. Most people would have panicked after hearing such unbelievable news. Clara's first concern remained the same as it had been from the beginning. She wanted to make sure the wolf was comfortable. "There is a small hunting cabin about half a mile from here," she said. "An old couple lets travelers use it during storms. We can clean his paw and let him recover." Nathan glanced toward the smoke drifting across the mountains. That would be wise. Together they slowly walked through the forest, keeping a gentle pace that allowed the wolf to move without rushing. Clara stayed beside him the entire way, occasionally offering a reassuring smile whenever he slowed. "You are doing much better," she encouraged softly. "We are almost there." The wolf answered by lightly brushing his shoulder against hers as they continued along the winding trail. By late afternoon, they reached the little wooden cabin hidden among tall pine trees. It was simple but welcoming, with a stone chimney, flower boxes beneath the windows, and a small porch overlooking the valley. Clara immediately gathered fresh water from a nearby spring, while Nathan quietly instructed the guards to remain outside. "No one enters unless invited," he said firmly. The guards obeyed without question. Inside, warm sunlight streamed through the windows as Clara carefully cleaned the wolf's paw with cool water and soft cloth strips. "You carried me across a bridge," she said with a gentle laugh. "The least I can do is help you feel better now." The wolf watched her with those remarkable silver eyes, never pulling away from her careful hands. When she finished wrapping the paw, she smiled with quiet satisfaction. "There, that should be much more comfortable." She then disappeared into the tiny kitchen before returning with a wooden bowl filled with fresh water. "I was going to make vegetable soup," she admitted. "I am not sure if wolves like vegetable soup, so I brought water first." The wolf looked at the bowl and then back at Clara. A deep rumbling sound escaped his chest, warm and surprisingly gentle. Clara laughed brightly. "I am choosing to believe that means thank you." Outside, Nathan watched through the cabin window with thoughtful eyes. One elderly royal advisor who had finally caught up with the search party quietly approached him. "Captain," he whispered, "I have never seen His Majesty so peaceful." Nathan nodded slowly. "Neither have I." His gaze remained fixed on the quiet scene inside the cabin, where a humble Omega hummed softly while arranging blankets beside the fireplace, completely unaware that the future of the kingdom now rested not upon power or ceremony, but upon the extraordinary kindness she had shown to a lonely wolf who refused to leave her side. The little cabin settled into peaceful silence as evening slowly covered the mountains. Outside, the last traces of smoke drifted across the distant valley, while cool air replaced the suffocating heat of the afternoon. Clara Brooks finished placing another log into the stone fireplace before brushing her hands together with a satisfied smile. "That should keep us warm tonight," she said softly. The giant black wolf rested on a thick blanket near the fire, its injured paw carefully wrapped just as she had promised. The warm glow reflected across its glossy fur, making the polished silver collar around its neck shine more clearly than before. Clara glanced toward it for a moment before looking away again. "I still cannot imagine you being a king," she admitted with a quiet laugh. "You seem much happier pretending to be an oversized forest traveler." The wolf slowly lifted its head and watched her with calm silver eyes. There was no pride in that gaze, no expectation, only quiet gratitude. Clara walked into the tiny kitchen and returned carrying a bowl filled with fresh water along with another containing pieces of cooked vegetables and herbs. She knelt beside the wolf. "I know wolves probably prefer different food," she said apologetically, "but this is everything I have until morning." The giant creature sniffed the bowl politely before taking a careful drink from the water. Clara smiled with relief. At least I guessed one thing correctly. She laughed to herself as she settled into the old wooden rocking chair beside the fire. The chair creaked gently while flames danced against the stone walls. For the first time since crossing the bridge, exhaustion finally caught up with her. Her eyelids grew heavier with every passing minute. Today has been very strange, she murmured sleepily. I rescued a wolf. Soldiers bowed to him. Someone called him the Alpha King. I still think I must be dreaming. The wolf quietly rose despite its tired leg and walked toward her. Before Clara realized what was happening, the enormous creature gently rested its head against the side of her chair. She smiled without opening her eyes and absent-mindedly stroked the soft fur behind one ear. You really like that, do not you? She whispered. The wolf closed its eyes as though the simple gesture brought a peace it had not felt in years. Outside, Captain Nathan Holloway quietly stood watch beneath the pine trees while the royal guards kept a respectful distance from the cabin. None of them wished to disturb the remarkable calm surrounding their king. Has the transformation begun? One guard asked softly. Nathan looked toward the bright, full moon slowly rising above the mountains. Soon, he answered. Inside the cabin, the moonlight gradually spilled through the small window, stretching across the wooden floor until it reached the resting wolf. A gentle silver glow surrounded the great black form. Clara stirred in the rocking chair, sensing warmth against her face. She slowly opened her eyes just as the soft light grew brighter. She blinked once in confusion. The enormous wolf was no longer lying beside the fireplace. Instead, a tall man with fair skin knelt quietly where the wolf had rested only moments before. His dark hair brushed his shoulders, and his calm silver eyes carried the same gentle expression she had trusted from the very beginning. He wore simple dark clothing that looked travel-worn rather than royal, yet there was quiet dignity in every movement. Clara sat completely still, convinced she had not fully awakened. The stranger looked at her with a grateful smile, touched by exhaustion. I apologize, he said in a warm, steady voice. This was never how I wished you to learn the truth. Clara stared at him, then slowly looked toward the folded blanket where the wolf had disappeared. She looked back again. The same silver eyes, the same calm presence, the same quiet kindness. Understanding slowly settled over her like the moonlight itself. It really was you, she whispered. The man lowered his head respectfully. My name is Damien Ashford. Clara remained speechless. I am the Alpha King. Silence filled the little cabin. Then, to Damien's complete surprise, Clara tilted her head thoughtfully before asking the first question that came into her mind. Does your paw still hurt? Damien blinked, unable to answer for a moment. Of all the things he expected after revealing his identity, concern for his injured leg had never crossed his mind. A quiet laugh escaped him, genuine and unguarded. Much less now, he admitted. Clara smiled warmly. Good. Because kings deserve to heal too. Damien looked at the humble Omega standing before him and realized that no one had spoken to him so simply, so honestly, or so kindly in many years. At that moment, he understood that she had not only carried him across a burning bridge. Without ever knowing it, she had carried him out of a loneliness that no crown had ever been able to lift. Morning sunlight slipped gently through the cabin windows, painting warm golden patterns across the wooden floor. Clara Brooks blinked awake to the comforting scent of fresh pine and the quiet crackle of the fireplace. For one brief moment, she wondered if the previous evening had only been a dream. Then she looked across the room and found Damien Ashford sitting beside the open window, watching the forest with calm silver eyes. He had changed back into his human form during the night, and now looked peaceful, dressed in the same simple dark clothing that carried little hint of royalty. When he noticed she was awake, he offered a warm smile. Good morning. Clara smiled back, just as naturally. Good morning. How is your leg? Damien glanced down before flexing his foot carefully. Much better, thanks to you. She nodded with obvious satisfaction. That is exactly what I hoped you would say. Damien could not help smiling again. Few people ever asked how he felt before asking about the kingdom, the council, or his responsibilities. Clara always seemed to notice the person before the title. She gathered a few vegetables and herbs from the small pantry before placing a pot over the fire. I hope you do not mind simple breakfast, she said cheerfully. The cabin does not have many choices. Damien quietly stood beside her. May I help? Clara looked at him with playful surprise. Can kings cook? He considered the question seriously. I have attended many royal banquets. She laughed softly. That was not my question. Damien admitted defeat with an amused expression. Then the honest answer is no. Clara handed him a wooden spoon anyway. Everyone starts somewhere. For the next several minutes, the tiny kitchen became filled with quiet laughter. Damien accidentally added far more herbs than the recipe required, while Clara nearly dropped the bowl after catching her sleeve on the corner of the table. I believe we have both contributed equally, Damien observed. Clara looked into the pot and smiled. If it tastes terrible, we will simply call it a new recipe. Outside, Captain Nathan Holloway watched the smoke finally disappear from the distant mountains. The danger had passed, but another challenge waited. Several elegant royal carriages slowly climbed the winding road toward the cabin. Their polished silver emblems reflected the morning sun. Nathan quietly sighed. The council has arrived. Within minutes, a small group of distinguished advisors stepped from the carriages. They wore finely tailored cloaks and carried themselves with careful dignity. The eldest among them approached Nathan first. Has His Majesty recovered? Nathan nodded. Yes. The advisor looked toward the cabin door. Then it is time for him to return to the capital. Inside, Damien paused as though he had already heard the conversation through the open window. The warmth in his expression faded into thoughtful silence. Clara noticed immediately. Something is wrong. Damien gently placed the wooden spoon onto the table. My counsel has come. Clara looked toward the window where the royal banners were now visible through the trees. She smiled kindly, though something inside her felt unexpectedly heavy. Then they must be eager to bring you home. Damien did not answer. Instead, he quietly walked onto the small porch. The advisors immediately bowed. Your Majesty, the eldest began respectfully. The kingdom has awaited your return. Preparations have already begun. The people are worried. The palace is ready. Damien listened without interrupting. Clara remained quietly inside, giving them privacy while pretending to stir the soup that no longer needed stirring. After a long silence, the advisor spoke again. Everything is prepared exactly as you requested before your disappearance. Damien slowly turned and looked back through the open doorway. Clara stood beside the fireplace, humming softly while arranging two simple wooden bowls on the table, as though she fully expected breakfast to continue. No ceremony, no expectation, just quiet kindness. Damien looked back toward his counsel. Everything, he asked calmly. Yes, Your Majesty. His silver eyes softened. Then something is still missing. The advisors exchanged uncertain glances. Damien's voice remained steady, yet warmer than any of them had ever heard. For years I believed my duty alone could carry this kingdom. I was wrong. A ruler who forgets peace cannot teach peace to others. He glanced once more toward the little cabin, where Clara smiled at him without asking him to choose. The ancient curse trapped me in the form of a wolf, he continued quietly. But loneliness kept me there far longer than any magic ever could. It was not power that began breaking that curse. It was kindness freely given. As though responding to those words, a gentle silver glow briefly surrounded him before fading almost immediately. Nathan noticed first. The transformation did not begin. It simply did not happen. Damien remained fully human beneath the morning sunlight. For the first time in many years, the curse had failed to reclaim him. The peaceful morning around the little mountain cabin did not last long. Before breakfast had even cooled on the wooden table, the clearing outside filled with elegant carriages, royal banners, and rows of respectfully waiting guards. Clara Brooks quietly stood near the doorway, unsure whether she should remain inside or step away. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness would one day place her in the middle of a royal gathering. Damien Ashford noticed the uncertainty in her eyes immediately. Please stay, he said gently. You belong here. Clara gave a small nervous smile. I am not certain your counsel agrees. Damien looked toward the waiting advisors outside. Then perhaps it is time they learn. Together they stepped onto the porch. The moment Damien appeared, every royal guard straightened. Every advisor bowed deeply. Captain Nathan Holloway lowered his head with quiet respect before stepping aside to allow the council to speak. The eldest advisor folded his hands before him. Your Majesty, the royal court is prepared for your return. The kingdom has waited with patience, but your presence is now needed more than ever. Damien listened calmly. I know. The council has already arranged your schedule. The bridge disaster has caused concern throughout the mountain provinces. The people wish to see their king. Damien nodded once. And they shall. The advisor smiled with visible relief. Wonderful. The first carriage is ready whenever you wish. Instead of walking toward the waiting procession, Damien turned and looked at Clara. She stood quietly beside the cabin wall, brushing a little ash from her sleeve as though trying to make herself invisible. Her simple cream dress, worn boots, and kind smile seemed completely out of place among polished armor and embroidered cloaks. Yet Damien realized that nothing before him had ever looked more like home. He slowly faced the council again. There is one condition. The advisors exchanged curious glances. Name it, Your Majesty. Damien answered without hesitation. The woman who carried me across that bridge will be treated with the same respect you show your king. Silence settled across the clearing. Clara blinked in surprise. Damien, he continued before anyone else could speak. When everyone believed only the throne mattered, she saw only someone who needed help. She never asked my title. She never expected a reward. She simply chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. The oldest advisor lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Another council member quietly looked toward Clara with growing admiration. Damien stepped closer to her. Every person standing here is alive today because she refused to leave someone behind. Clara shook her head gently. I only did what anyone should do. Captain Nathan smiled softly. With respect, Miss Brooks, many people would have turned back when they saw the fire. Another guard nodded. Very few would have crossed that bridge. Clara looked down, slightly embarrassed by the attention. I was only thinking about helping one frightened wolf. Damien's silver eyes warmed. Exactly. He turned back toward the gathered royal escort. The kingdom deserves to know that compassion is not weakness. It is the strongest foundation any kingdom can have. For several long moments, no one moved. Then the eldest advisor slowly stepped forward until he stood before Clara. To her complete surprise, he bowed deeply. One by one, every other advisor followed. Then Captain Nathan lowered one knee. Every royal guard did the same. The entire clearing became silent as dozens of loyal servants of the crown offered their respect to the humble Omega who had expected nothing in return. Clara immediately looked overwhelmed. Please, you do not have to do this. Nathan looked up with a gentle smile. We do. Damien stood quietly beside her, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. No royal decree had commanded those bows. Gratitude had. Clara slowly looked across the faces surrounding her. She did not see nobles or soldiers anymore. She saw people whose hearts had been touched by a story they would never forget. A soft breeze carried the fresh scent of pine through the clearing as sunlight broke between the mountain clouds. Damien offered Clara his hand. She looked at it for a brief moment before placing her own into his with a shy smile. The advisors watched as their king stood beside the woman who had changed his life without ever asking for recognition. In that quiet mountain clearing, they all understood something that no lesson inside the palace had ever taught them. A crown could command loyalty, but only kindness could truly earn it. The journey to the capital began the following morning beneath a sky washed clean by gentle rain. The mountains that had seemed so dangerous only days before now glowed beneath warm sunlight, their pine forests stretching endlessly across the horizon. Clara Brooks sat quietly inside one of the royal carriages, still struggling to believe how quickly her life had changed. Across from her, Damien Ashford smiled as she carefully held a small basket filled with fresh herbs she insisted on bringing from the mountain cabin. You brought those all the way to the palace? He asked with quiet amusement. Clara nodded. Someone always needs medicine sooner or later. Damien looked at the basket before meeting her eyes again. You never stop thinking about other people. Clara smiled shyly. I suppose it is a habit now. The carriage rolled gently along the winding roads as villages appeared one after another. Word of the Alpha King's return had already spread across the kingdom. Farmers stopped working in their fields to wave. Children ran beside the road, laughing with excitement. Elderly couples stood outside their homes with grateful smiles as the royal procession passed. Clara noticed something surprising. Every time Damien greeted someone through the carriage window, his smile was warmer than the formal expressions she had imagined a king would wear. They truly love you, she said softly. Damien glanced toward the cheering families. I hope to deserve that love a little more each day. Hours later, the tall, white walls of the capital finally appeared beyond the hills. Towering stone gates opened slowly as silver banners danced above them in the afternoon breeze. The streets overflowed with people waiting to welcome their king home. Flowers drifted through the air, while musicians played joyful melodies from every corner of the city. Clara instinctively moved slightly farther back inside the carriage. Damien noticed immediately. What is wrong? She looked down at her simple cream dress and well-worn boots. Everyone here looks so important. Damien gently shook his head. The person who carried hope across a burning bridge does not need expensive clothes to belong anywhere. Clara smiled gratefully, but still looked uncertain. The carriage finally stopped before the great palace. Marble staircases stretched upward beneath magnificent stone columns, while hundreds of royal attendants waited in perfect formation. As Damien stepped down, the entire courtyard bowed. Clara hesitated inside the carriage until Damien quietly extended his hand toward her. Come with me. She accepted it. The instant Clara stepped onto the palace courtyard, a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh flowers across the stone steps. She took only 3 careful steps before the polished marble proved far smoother than the mountain paths she knew so well. Her foot slipped slightly. Oh! Before she could lose her balance, Damien gently steadied her hand with the same calm patience he had shown countless times before. Clara laughed softly, slightly embarrassed. I was hoping my first moment at the palace would be a little more graceful. Damien smiled warmly. I was expecting exactly this. Several nearby guards quietly smiled to themselves. The king who had once carried every burden alone now looked happier, simply helping someone regain her balance. Inside the grand hall, members of the royal court waited beneath soaring ceilings decorated with crystal chandeliers and colorful stained glass. Clara looked around in silent wonder. She had never imagined a place so beautiful. Yet despite the splendor surrounding them, Damien's attention remained fixed on the woman walking beside him. At the end of the hall stood an enormous window overlooking the city. Beyond it stretched the deep canyon where the old rope bridge had once connected 2 mountain provinces. Engineers, builders, and architects waited there beside detailed drawings spread across a long wooden table. Damien invited Clara to stand beside him. There is one more journey we must finish. The chief architect carefully unrolled the largest blueprint. Instead of another rope bridge, it showed an elegant stone bridge supported by strong arches that would withstand storms, floods, and passing years. Clara studied the drawing with quiet amazement. It is beautiful. Damien nodded. No family should ever risk losing this crossing again. The chief architect smiled respectfully. Construction begins tomorrow morning. Damien looked toward the distant canyon visible through the palace window. This bridge will stand where the old one fell. Then he turned toward Clara. And every traveler who crosses it will remember that courage is strongest when it carries kindness. Clara looked at the drawing once more before quietly wiping away a tear she had not realized had formed. She had crossed the old bridge believing she was saving one lonely wolf. Standing inside the royal palace, she finally understood that her simple choice had inspired an entire kingdom to build something that would protect countless lives for generations to come. Nearly 1 year later, the first morning sunlight of spring spilled across the new stone bridge stretching proudly above the canyon where an old rope crossing had once swayed in the wind. The rushing river still flowed far below, the towering pines still covered the mountainsides, and the valley remained as beautiful as ever. Yet everything important had changed. Families crossed safely with wagons filled with grain. Children raced from one side to the other with joyful laughter. Travelers no longer stopped to wonder whether the bridge would carry them. They simply smiled and continued their journey. Clara Brooks stood quietly near the entrance, her hands resting on the smooth stone railing while the cool mountain breeze carried the scent of fresh wildflowers through the valley. She looked toward the distant cliffs where smoke had once darkened the sky and remembered the frightened wolf she had refused to leave behind. It almost feels unreal, she whispered. Damien Ashford stepped beside her, dressed simply despite the royal ceremony waiting only a few yards away. Sometimes the greatest changes begin with one ordinary decision, he replied. Clara smiled softly. I never thought one afternoon could change an entire kingdom. Damien looked across the bridge where hundreds of citizens had already gathered for the dedication ceremony. Neither did I. Captain Nathan Holloway approached with a warm expression. Your Majesty, everyone is ready. Damien nodded before turning back toward Clara. Will you walk across with me? She laughed quietly. As long as this bridge is much steadier than the last one. Damien smiled. I made certain of that. Together they stepped onto the wide stone path while applause echoed across the canyon. Unlike the old rope bridge, this one never trembled beneath their feet. Strong arches carried every step with quiet confidence. Along both sides, flowering vines climbed elegant railings, and carved stone lanterns reflected the bright morning light. Halfway across, Clara noticed a polished granite marker placed beside the center arch. She stopped walking. Carefully engraved into the smooth stone were words she had never expected to see. The Bridge of Kindness. Beneath the title, another inscription read, dedicated to the courage of one humble Omega whose compassion united a kingdom. Clara slowly covered her mouth with one hand, unable to speak. Damien. He looked at her with gentle silver eyes. People will remember this bridge because it stands strong, but I hope they remember why it was built even more. Tears filled Clara's eyes as she traced the carved letters with trembling fingertips. I only wanted to help someone. Damien quietly took her hand. Exactly. That is why this story deserved to be remembered. When they reached the far side of the bridge, the gathered crowd welcomed them with warm smiles instead of formal silence. Farmers stood beside merchants. Craftsmen stood beside scholars. Children held small bouquets of mountain flowers. No one looked at Clara as though she were an outsider. They greeted her as someone whose kindness belonged to all of them. An elderly woman stepped forward carrying a woven basket filled with fresh bread. Thank you, she said gently. My grandchildren will never know the fear of crossing the old bridge. A young father smiled while lifting his little daughter into his arms. Our family crossed safely this morning because of what you inspired. Clara accepted their gratitude with the same quiet humility that had guided every choice she had ever made. Please promise me something, she said softly. The people listened. Whenever you find someone who needs help, do not wait to learn their name or their title before choosing kindness. A peaceful silence followed her words before smiles spread through the crowd one after another. High above the canyon, a magnificent black wolf appeared briefly on a distant ridge, its silver eyes shining beneath the morning sun. It lifted its head toward the clear blue sky before disappearing peacefully among the pines, leaving only the gentle mountain breeze behind. Damien looked toward the ridge with quiet understanding before turning back to Clara. There was a time I believed strength came from standing alone, he said. Now I know real strength comes from allowing kindness to change us. Clara squeezed his hand gently as they continued walking together across the bridge toward the waiting kingdom. The mountains remained timeless, the river continued its endless journey, and the bridge stood firm between both sides of the canyon, reminding every traveler who crossed it that the strongest paths are never built by stone alone. They are built by compassion freely given, courage quietly chosen, and hearts willing to carry someone else when the road becomes too difficult to walk alone.